The next bookie could very well be one of the most successful ever. Now, he did, after all, manage to, in fact, ensnare 4 big international players. Again, we have the names, but we will not disclose them. What we will show is the circle of the influence this bookie, or JS, as he is called by the ACSU, commands.
A former top South African player, a former Kenyan cricketer, a former New Zealand team member, a former colourful English Test player. Top cricketers, different teams, different persons, but with this man as the common link. Identified only as JS, this man is one of the top bookies in the country. So big, in fact, that he had both the CBI and its British counterpart probe cases against him. What ACSU uncovered is an eye-opener. JS allegedly contacted the brother of a top international player, offering him the equivalent of 50 lakh rupees to throw a match. The topic of discussion between JS, a former Kenyan captain, and a Zimbabwe-based bookie for over 5 months. More than 115 calls were made, allegedly to fix these matches. JS is believed to be at the center of many more fixes, still being identified by authorities. Bureau Report, headlines today.
Now, Charu, I don't know if you were able to see the audio-visual presentation, but I'm sure you must have heard what we are actually playing out. Is it very normal for this to happen in cricket or in the cricketing fraternity, for bookies to be so closely associated with such top-notch international players?
Yeah, well, I both saw and heard in the large in the large part of what you were showing on television. But you know, it's a very big world, and yes, it's very difficult for players to know who they're meeting or who's meeting who, or a friend of a friend of a friend. And sometimes there's a crowd and a photograph is taken that you were with so-and-so. You know, all that's fine. I realize that, you know, I suppose people will say, but you must have known him to be standing close to him. But that doesn't very often happen. I mean, people just crowd around you and photographs are taken, or some guy says, well, here's a good friend of mine, quick photo, and out. So there are many scenarios where you don't know somebody very well, and yet a photograph is taken, or, you know, you're seen in the company of. That is not conclusive proof. But let me not sound like I'm some player protector or whatever. I'll just make a quick couple of points because, as you know, Sanket, sorry, I do have to leave a little early. There are people at home. One, if any cricketer plays for any association, state association, and certainly the BCCI, any category, let us not be lenient anymore. Poor chap didn't know enough. You sign a contract, you should know. I think there's enough noise being made now to ensure that every player must be held equally guilty, not like a poor chap first offense kind of thing. Our biggest problem is what? That in India particularly, we don't, I mean, betting or placing or accepting a bet is the lightest possible crime. Nobody ever seems to go to jail. You always hear reports about 2 bookies caught with 3 laptops and 4 phones and 10,000 rupees. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So the scenario doesn't lend any sense of confidence to those who would like these people to be locked in. Secondly, also for the player. Now, once you are indicted beyond all reasonable proof, I think a punishment system is not enough. Now, I know that, you know, I keep mentioning that if you murder, you know, if there's a life imprisonment or death on murder, people still murder. However, if a player is caught beyond reasonable proof, irrefutable proof, then what is our punishment system? And I dare suggest here today that not only should he receive, or she receive, life bans, you should have maybe 90% of their earnings through the game fined, confiscated, and of course, perhaps 10 years of jail. Then you're talking some kind of deterrent to the player, saying, well, it's really not worth it. And maybe that's some sort of a solution right there. What about the bookies themselves? I mean, they're all scot-free. Nobody ever seems to go to jail. Nobody ever seems to be booked. There has to be a heavy punishment here, Sanket. Otherwise, you know, I mean, it is going to remain the kind of crime where people will just laugh it off and say, well, never mind.
And through the course of this show, we are also going to question the ICC, Nikhil. I mean, this report is of 2012. It's 2014 already. What has happened to all the investigation that has been carried? 470 matches have been investigated. Where is the result?
Absolutely, Sanket. You know, you hit the nail on the head, saying you've investigated so many games, like we just showed. Maybe that Bangladesh Zimbabwe series, you've got this whole booking nexus with players and things like that. When you've got all the details in your own backyard, why aren't you doing anything about it? At the end of the day, like Charu said, very important point, hang the players if you once find them guilty. But what about the guys who are getting these players to do what they're doing, these bookies?
Absolutely.
What are the punishments? The ICC anti-corruption unit has to be hand in glove with respective boards around the world and with their investigative agencies, the country's investigative agency, and it has got to be a very serious punishable act.
In fact, we are going to give out specifics here. And Shivani, if you look at slide number 20, and I'll ask the producers to pull up slide number 20 and show on your screen right now, it actually talks about this huge nexus of the person called JS. This is what we are calling here the JS fix. He is in touch directly. I mean, Charu, you were saying that somebody could just harmlessly come close to you and get a photograph clicked. This is specifics. 105 contacts to a particular phone number in Zimbabwe. 10 contacts to another mobile number. Then few mobile phone numbers connecting to a player, a Kenyan player. These are specifics that the ACSU is actually working on. Charu, that was for you.
Yeah, without doubt. I mean, it does prove that that there are people who can get closer and closer to players, and once you get close to one player, perhaps you can get closer to many other players as well, or close to one family, you can get closer to many others from that family or otherwise. I mean, it's not so difficult to imagine that. I will go back once again to saying, as an individual, if I get the phone number of somebody or many other phone numbers, or I get a photograph taken, it is a little difficult to avoid that, much as we'd like that to be avoided. But what is the punishment? So if that is lacking, and legalizing betting is not really a big answer here, because I mean, say in the UK, betting is legal, and yet the 3 big cases of spot fixing were all spotted there, despite the fact that betting is legal. So you've got to be a lot tighter on the punishment. Otherwise, these people have a right to go around getting these numbers. I mean, that is what they do for a living. So we can't cut that out completely. We cannot shut these players into a bubble somewhere and not have them exposed, or their families exposed to anybody at all.
Before we quickly move on to the other,
why is it not there?
Charu, before we move on to the other big expose as part of this ACSU report, I believe Boria has a point to mention. Boria, and then Shivani also wanted to say something. Boria, to you first.
Sanket, very simple. You showed one Zimbabwean, you showed one Kenyan player out in the open. You showed one the New Zealand player. Let's put this on record. That New Zealand player is still very much out in the open and is associated with several big teams in this country. You showed 2 other players, the English player associated with English county cricket. You showed other players. They are still out in the open. What has the ACSU done? They are saying this person got in touch with these bookies. According to the ACSU rules, any player who is in direct contact with bookies and conclusive proof, that player, that bookie has to be nabbed. Do we have evidence? If this ACSU report was not accessed by headlines today, what would have happened? Have these bookies been nabbed? Have these players been nabbed? We can confirm.
Well, that's a question that the ICC has to answer, Boria. It's for the ICC to actually answer. 2 years, what has actually happened to this report?
Obviously, the fact of the matter is the players are still roaming out in the open. The players are still very much out there. What has happened to this report? Why have these players not been arrested? Why have these bookies not been arrested? What has been done to sweep away match fixing and spot fixing? That is the fundamental point. By showing phone numbers, we are getting nowhere. The fact is, action has not been taken. And that is why cricket is losing out.
Absolutely. Shivani, you wanted to make a point, but clearly action is something that everybody is going to expect from here on.
Absolutely. The point I was going to make, Sanket, is taking on from what Charu said actually. In 2011, the News of the World sting operation actually blew the cover of spot fixing in the England versus Pakistan series. The point that I'm trying to make is that the ICC actually very rarely has been able to come out and say, okay, this is the proof we have got, and these are the names, and this is the concrete action that we're doing. Most of the operations when it comes to match fixing or spot fixing have actually happened through the media, and therefore again and again the ICC is exposed that while it may have disappointed, and one can question how much
And we have
it has
proved
also.
it. The ICC has
Hasn't
conclusive
it?
proof.
There is no action that conclusive or logical action that is taken. And I also wanted to point out, Sanket, in this report, there is a table which says there have been 11 corrupt approaches. Now, these corrupt approaches are separate from suspicious activities. They're separate from suspect activities. So these are established corrupt approaches. 11 is the number for a certain amount of time, and that is too high a number. Exactly
Okay.
what happened to those 11 corrupt approaches, nobody knows.